let me introduce you to the Genus podcast slash live stream. For those of you that are tuning in for the first time, we do this live stream every Sunday morning at 8:45 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. The general breakdown is that we start off with some general brewing news and also news that is happening around Genus Brewing. And then we go into a beer of the week where we take a beer style and do a full breakdown of that style, choose some hops, malt, yeast, and water profile that will suit it very well, and ultimately set you guys up to have a good idea on how to brew that yourselves. And then we also go into usually a couple different discussion topics. This week we are really going to kind of narrow it down to talking about the STA1 gene and how that affects yeast. And then we finish it up with a general kind of questioning. So we let you guys shoot us some questions, and then we do our best to answer them. So welcome to the Genus Brewing live stream slash podcast.
With that introduction that I just did perfectly, let's jump right into our Genus Brewing news. One thing that I'm pretty excited about, actually, we've been doing a really good job at nailing hard seltzers, and so we've got a new one on tap this week. It is a raspberry ginger hard seltzer. We've been having a lot of fun playing around with basically what creates a nice, relatively neutral profile, but with a hint of beeriness.
Yeah, so seltzers are, as anyone that's in the know-how, have been really kind of taken off over the last year now. And I feel like I don't want to toot our own horn, but I feel like we're probably doing the best around town so far with them.
We are winning.
We're kind of nailing the seltzers, and it has been, I mean.
Whether or not you think that's true, I'm saying yes.
Honestly, we've worked really hard. There's been a lot of trial and error.
There has been a lot of trial and error.
We spent the entire spring and summer experimenting with different ways to make seltzers.
It takes specific nutrients. We played around with different yeasts, like how to do the additions, all that. We wanted to make sure that we had something that was still us, and the fact that it had some character to it, but also neutral enough that it appealed to the seltzer crowd. And I think what we've done lately, kudos to Tim, honestly, for the vast majority of all that. But is what we have lately has been really. And
sometimes we stumble upon gold. This is not one of those times. This has literally been. I would say
we stumbled and then fell down the stairs and then climbed our way back up to gold.
Yes, there was a good half a dozen early seltzers that, for the most part, all of them were drinkable. Yeah. But we definitely it was like one or two that were like, oh man, those ones stood out. What did we do differently with those? Right. All right, let's build on that. So it's really kind of a culmination of a lot of work. And like Peter said, it's been pretty much all Tim. Playing with those things. So I'm glad that we are sort of on the leading end of the pack when it comes to doing that in Spokane. So.
At least as far as our own self-gratification goes.
Yeah, pretty much.
We also are almost done with a Pickle Beer. Pickle Beer was something we were challenged to do a long time ago, and I actually offloaded that to one of our local homebrewers here who does a really good job. His name's Hayden, and he made a 5-gallon batch that I thought was amazing, but 5 gallons doesn't last, so we had him come back and make a 1-barrel batch here. That's almost done. We basically just got to add vinegar and maybe do some fine tweaking on that dill flavor, and then it'll be ready to go. So we'll have that on tap soon.
Well, also, as of, I believe that was yesterday, right? We got the Saison versus Saison video up. Did a fun little tasting with Todd Grove. Not Groves. You see how I did that?
Todd Grove.
From last week. He is also the head brewer, for now anyway, at River City Brewing. And so we compared 3 of the Saison yeast strains from Imperial side by Omega, that's what I meant to say.
Yep, 3 of the Saison strains from Omega yeast. And we're actually going to do a bigger breakdown on a lot of what we found out later on in this same episode.
So yeah, but ultimately all the strains came out different. If you want to learn more, go ahead and do a little search for that video. I'm sure it'll pop up for you if you watch our channel regularly.
Yeah. Speaking of new videos, Web Season 2, Episode 1, the first new Will It Beer challenge is almost out. We basically have those beers carbonated and ready to go, sitting in the walk-in. We just got to get everyone back together to do a final tasting and judging, and that one will be ready.
That is easier said than done. But yeah, any day now we should be able to get everybody in and make that tasting happen, and then it's
69 watching right now.
Really. And then it's just a matter of having Ryan edit that and get it out to you.
Yeah. Tank tops are finally live on the Genus Brewing e-store. Just in time.
Good job. Way to get those tank tops out.
I also did throw a new a new sweatshirt on the e-store as well. So check that out if you're looking for some Genius Brewing merchandise and want to support the channel.
Yeah.
And finally, we also did a video on making kimchi down at the Steel Barrel. We're reinvigorating the Steel Barrel channel, and I'm going to kind of use that personally as more of a food and alcohol-focused R&D kind of session. Definitely not my area of expertise, but is something that I think it's going to be a fun journey to kind of go on and build new food and bar menus. So if you want to support that, check that out. That is a new video on the Steel Barrels channel.
Yeah,
on
and
making kimchi.
Spoiler alert: when you ferment plants, they actually start tasting good.
Yeah,
Who would have known?
it's a sneaky way to get vegetables in.
Super sneaky. All right. Well, other than that, what else do we got? Oh, I guess we can update them on the red beer too, because it's also ready to. We gotta basically tap that and taste that and
Tap that, get on
and
the
then
floor.
get that recipe up on the website as well. So
Yeah.
so lots of stuff coming for you all this week. And on that note, let's go into our
Beer of the week, bum bum bum. Beer of the week,
and that is actually no longer a style, right?
No longer a style. So back when I was first learning all the BJCP stuff, it was before the new style guidelines came out. And so probably 2013 and 2014, I hammered my study sessions very, very hard and learned the entire BJCP just for them to come out with a brand new one in 2015. And one of my favorite delineations was between Northern English and Southern English brown ales. So today we're going to be talking about the Northern English brown ale, which actually has some distinct characteristics different than a standard brown ale, which is meant to be more caramely sweet.
Yes, and as of 2015, both of those have been lumped into the same category. So apparently BJCP just doesn't love us anymore.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, because they are distinctly different too.
Yeah, they're very different.
And let's tell them how.
So in general, basically what is the difference is that the Southern English brown ale is going to be less hoppy and a little bit more caramely sweet, have a, we'll call it a sensual roundness because that sounds good. And the Northern English brown ale is going to be a little bit brighter, a little bit hoppier. It's going to be more of a nutty sweetness instead of a caramel sweetness, and it's going to lean into the characteristic English style hops like Kent Goldings, even some Fuggles, some Northern Brewer, things like that.
Perfect. So ultimately we are really building everything in this flavor, or in this description, I should say, really builds off of the nuttiness. So we're talking about a really base nutty backbone, obviously a little bit of brown malt or some other sort of biscuit type adjunct malt in there is going to be appropriate. But like Peter said, when we're comparing these to a Southern English brown ale, we're going to be kind of holding back a little more on that, and we're going to be letting those hops come through a little bit more aggressively as well.
And eliminating caramel.
Yes. Yeah, so no caramel malts. Yeah, exactly.
I've actually made a really good version of a Northern English brown ale with just using two-row and brown malts. There are, as we've said, I think we actually did a video on this, a wide array of brown malts, but the one that I like to use is Baird's brown malts because it has a little bit of natural sharpness that I think complements hops really well.
Perfect. Yeah, so a little bit of brown malt will go a long way. Otherwise, to build up that nuttiness, Peter, let's talk about our malt of the week.
Our malt of the week is not brown malt. It is actually Halcyon. And so I want to build on a nice flavorful base, basically, without adding too much sweetness with the base malt. So Halcyon is a lighter kind of Maris Otter style base malt. So it has a lot of that same rich fullness that you expect from Maris Otter, but it's not going to start building a sweet platform for the rest of the beer to go on top of. So what that's going to do is going to give you a nice avenue to kind of give you some more brighter, nutty toffee notes. And having it be a fuller malt like Halcyon, it's going to kind of build a better layer that leans into those nutty flavors that you're going to build on top with your specialty malts.
Yeah, especially because you don't have a whole lot of malt to work with. You're talking about a total grain bill here of probably only 10 pounds or so. Probably right in that 10-pound range. So you got an OG of 1040 to 1052, so we're not talking about big beers, we're talking in that 4 to 5% range, and then final gravity is all the way down to 10.008. So these beers can finish pretty dry, which means that you're also probably going to be doing a fairly low mash rest, probably even down in the mid 140s, I would say.
Our favorite rests of mashes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we love doing that just because drier beer is always better.
Yeah, exactly.
And
more bang for your buck, more alcohol, less carbs.
Yeah, so having a really nice full base malt to work with is going to give you that leg up so that you don't end up with a beer that almost lacks body and kind of has a watery profile to it. So.
Yep. So that's going to be a great malt of the week. On top of that, I'd probably throw in some brown malt. That's my favorite malt to kind of give you that that nuttiness and that little bit of bitterness that brown malt can give. Like I said, I preferred Baird's. There's other brown malts that kind of get a little bit too coffee-like for me. So do be careful when you're picking brown malts because not all brown malts are created equal. And then this is something that you can definitely kiss with a little bit of aromatic on the middle if you want to kind of build that nutty profile. And then also on the darker end, a touch of something like Carafa just for coloration, not really for that same roasty, toasty notes.
Yeah, I definitely think the Best Malls aromatic that we had in, I don't know if we still do, but I feel like just like 2 or 3 ounces of that would give it a really nice little kind of mid note that might actually balance some of the dryness of the brown malt that you'll throw at it too. So
yeah,
so speaking about brown malt, we're still not throwing huge amounts of this, right?
Right.
Like for this style, because it's going to be lighter than the Southern English brown, we're probably talking about
15% somewhere in there.
Yeah, range. I was like probably like 3/4 of a pound. Does that sound about right?
You can go more than that. It kind of depends on what you're doing with the Carafa. So if you go 3/4 of a pound, and if you also build with some aromatic malt, you can go 3/4 of a pound and then just kiss it darker with Carafa. But I mean, I have made something that's similar to this, but it's an imperial version where I just do 2-row, and it's actually 25% brown malt. So you can use a hefty amount of it if it's Baird's. If it's the Thomas Fawcett one, then that's way too much. So again, be careful with all that. Yeah. Know your brands.
Not to beat a dead horse, but all malts are not created equal.
Yeah, brown malt is not brown malt is not brown malt.
If you wanted to learn that for sure, we did a video on it.
Speaking of moving on, like we already talked about, let's talk about our hop of the week, which is a classic, and I actually don't even know if we've used this as the hop of the week yet.
I think we have.
No, we probably have because it's a famous hop, and it actually is for an older world hop. It is an incredible hop, and that is East Kent Goldings. Yeah,
so East Kent Golding is hard to beat. I actually don't have stats on it right now, but I can tell you from my experience, alpha range is actually quite a bit. It can go anywhere from like all the way down into like the 3-ish%, all the way up to, I've seen it, I think above 7 once.
I've probably seen at least high 6s.
Yeah, I think there was one that was like 7.2 that we got that was super high.
If it was, I forgot about it.
But yeah, so anyway, pretty wide range, but ultimately a really nice earthy hop. Earthy and also I want to call it like bergamot tea floral.
Yeah, it has a little bit of citrus to it. I just say it's got a little bit of lemon to it, but it's got classic herbalness or earthiness with just a little bit of that hi-hat of like a lemon, or like a bergamot would be like an orange citrus kind of tone.
Yeah.
But what that does is it adds a lot of dimension without you being, having some sort of citrus note thrown in your face. It's like, oh, I can tell there's citrus in there, but for the most part, it's this robust, earthy, but not too dull hop.
Yeah, and so it's a really nice balancing hop for beers that aren't going to punch you in the face with any particular flavor. Beers that you're looking for that nice, delicate balance on to find a nuance in really the profile that you're going for. And I think a Northern English brown ale is the perfect example of those kind of beers.
Yeah, and you really want to highlight the hop in this one because it's you're letting the hops kind of shine and let the malts kind of take a little bit of a back step without it being a hoppy beer.
Yeah. So speaking of quantities, we are shooting for a bitterness range of about 20 to 30 IBUs, but we are going to be throwing a fair amount on the back end, right? How much are you thinking that you're
So yeah, this is one that you're going to be throwing in probably all around, a little bit of the front end, and probably anywhere between 2 and 3 ounces, just in that late edition. Between a 0 and a 15 probably is where all that's going to go.
Yeah.
You definitely don't want to get to the point where you're over bittering, but staging this out, and again, we've talked about this before, but this depends on how quickly you're going to be cooling your wort down. But staging out this is going to give you a good range of flavors and a subtle bitterness that's going to help balance the beer, as well as a lot of that earthy and bright, a little bit of that bright citrus flavor.
Perfect. Yeah, so shooting for like total hops of like in that like 2-ish ounce range.
Anywhere between 2 and 3.5, kind of depending on the AAUs.
Yeah. If you want to go sweeter, one of the examples that they actually did mention, unfortunately, is the Newcastle Brown Ale.
Yeah.
Which is definitely on the sweet side.
The Newcastle is on the sweet side just because, maybe it's different in actual Newcastle, like actually in England, but at least the Newcastle that we get over here is they use caramel flavoring. So not even caramel malts, but they use caramel flavoring in it. And so it's got the base body of a Northern English brown, but with this really weird artificial flavor on top of it.
Yeah, and one of the specific descriptions, too, they said is that it should not have any diacetyl, especially butterscotch-like flavor to it. So everything should just be in that nice kind of round biscuit realm.
And it should be a very sessionable, easy drinking beer.
Yep.
With character.
Perfect. So let's go on to our yeast of the week, which is one we've used a bunch of times, and that is going to be the classic house strain from Imperial, or 1098 from Yeast, or SO4 from Fermentus.
Or 1007 from White Labs, something like that. It's the Whitbread strain, and the Whitbread strain, that's one of two Whitbread strains, I should say. This particular one is known for having a subtle malt lean, so it does lean onto the malt side. But this one is very clean and very versatile. It's just kind of a monster. It doesn't throw diacetyl, depending, no matter the temperature range. It's very difficult to do this yeast wrong. But for a nice neutral beer like this, where you just want a subtle malt lean and not a lot of extra fruitiness to kind of build and muddy down that flavor, House, I think, is the perfect choice.
Yeah, and it flocculates out well, so you can drink the beer pretty quickly. We're talking about like a 2 or 3 week turnover on it. And yeah, it's one of my favorite yeast strains. I would ferment this actually on the low end of its range for this beer style. I would probably keep it right around 65 degrees actually. Yeah. And do kind of a colder fermentation, which means it might take a few more days, but it'll keep it super, super clean and really subdue any of those esters that it's going to throw. So that's our yeast of the week. And then lastly, let's talk a little bit about water, Peter.
So we definitely want a little bit of that kind of rocky minerality. It's going to be very common of most English styles, actually, but especially English styles that lean into a hop like East Kent Goldings. A little bit more of that rocky profile is going to help amplify the effects of the hops without actually needing a lot of hops in the first place. And so just to kind of throw out a general range, I said calcium can be way up there in the 150 range. That's not ultra high like Burton-on-Trent, but that is pretty high. Magnesium, 20, anywhere in the 10 to 30 range is probably fine. Sodium I have relatively low actually on this. Again, that's going to help build that kind of rocky, bright profile. Chlorides, medium, low, I have them at 30. Sulfates can be really high, anywhere from 120 to probably 250 in that range, kind of depending on where your balance lies. And then your water should be relatively hard, I said, bicarb at 120 or above.
Yeah, so relatively hard water, pushing those high sulfates in there, sulfate to chloride ratio. And so not quite Burton-on-Trent, but getting in there.
Getting in there. And that extra minerality, what it's going to do is it's going to give you a nice texture on your tongue. It's going to feel a little bit more like sparkling water, I guess is a good way to put it. And sure, it's going to amplify those hops.
Perfect. Well, that is our beer of the week, which is a throwback to the Northern English Brown Ale. Did I just butcher that? No, I nailed it. Yeah, okay, never mind. I did not butcher it.
If you want to waste a lot of time on styles that aren't technically styles anymore, go back and read your 2004 BJCP style guidelines.
By the way, there is so much hate in the comments on Newcastle right now.
I
was like, we opened up a can of worms there.
There's someone that also tried to get banned by mentioning Crystal Malt should be our malt of the week.
Oh, man.
Someone mentioned if that's ever the malt of the week, then they need to send in, it's an SOS, and they need to send help.
Yeah, that's our secret code word. Crystal Malt. The ship is sinking.
Send help.
You good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
Just trying to think of more references, but I'm like, they're all references that no one would get.
Okay, well, let's start our deep dive into our first topic now. And so put on your nerd hat, chug your morning beers or evening beers if it's, 2 a.m. I don't know what that's morning.
That's morning or evening.
Yeah.
Depends on who you are.
And prepare for some serious nerd talk.
A wondrous adventurefulness.
Wonderful. No, ultimately, so STA1 is a gene that encodes. Oh, I shouldn't say encodes. A gene that.
It codes for the expression of basically Diastaticus. So it codes for a Diastaticus yeast.
For glucoamylase.
Glucoamylase, does, yeah. So it's a Diastaticus yeast, which codes for glucoamylase, basically. So it produces the STA1 gene, codes for the production of glucoamylase, an enzyme that breaks down sugars during fermentation and is served to dry out your beer. Why we want to talk about this is a couplefold. One, we just kind of give you a better understanding of how the STA1 gene works, how the Diastaticus variants, different yeasts, how different they can all express this, and talk about how science kind of changes over time, and something that was thought to be hard fact 5-6 years ago really has come out and been a lot more studied lately. And so the overarching theme is going to be, even if you find a scholarly article that says one focused thing, beer is very, very variable. Yes, very variable.
Nailed it.
And there's a lot that we still don't know, and research is ongoing. So even if a lot of evidence can point one way, a lot of things in the beer industry can still go the other way. And that's why we like to say experiment yourself and learn.
Perfect.
Now I can take a breath.
Now you can take a breath? All right, yeah. So to start out with, Diastaticus variants of yeast simply mean that they are a yeast strain that have a gene, the STA1 gene, that allows that yeast to produce and actually kind of like put out into the environment glucoamylase, which is the enzyme that we rely on in our mashes to actually convert starches into short chain fermentable sugars for your yeast.
It's one of like 45 enzymes, by the way. So there's a lot of things even going on in mash temperature mashing that goes on that has been focused in on a little bit more than people realize. Like you hear 4 or 5 different enzymes or something like that, and there's a lot of them.
Yes, and this is just one. And ultimately, what people see is when they see this Diastaticus variant, they immediately think of bottle bombs, because I would say, I don't know, half a dozen years ago now, basically a lot of middle range commercial breweries were starting to do canning, starting to send beer out, and they were getting bottle bombs from it, right?
Yeah, and they can test for the result of getting bottle bombs, but they couldn't really, that was before we actually PCR DNA mapped the genes for the different yeasts, all the yeasts, and so we didn't really know what the consistent factor was. And so what we've come to find out is that a lot of yeasts actually can express this STA1 gene to one extent or another, but not all of them express them in the same way or the same degree. This is also, by the way, taking a step back, the enzyme that is used if you make a brut IPA.
Exactly. So, and ultimately, what we're trying to dispel is that if you happen to be brewing with a yeast that says, yes, this is a Diastaticus positive yeast, it doesn't necessarily mean your beer is going to be bad. It doesn't mean you're going to get bottle bombs. It's just something to consider in your brewing process and to consider when it comes down to basically how dry that beer is going to finish.
Yeah, and so this is something, since we've started mapping all the genes of all the different yeasts, that is actually a lot more expressed on websites. And so I want to say it's probably 2 or 3 years ago now that White Labs actually started putting, hey, this yeast is a Diastaticus variant, or some yeast sites will just say it's, it's positive for the STA1 gene. The number one takeaway from what we're trying to tell you is that you got to take that with a grain of salt, because some yeasts will definitely go ham and express this and dry out your beer. A lot of Saison strains are like that. That's why a lot of Saisons, regardless of mash temperature, will finish relatively dry, like 1.006. But there are also some other yeasts, a lot of softer Belgian yeasts that are STA1 positive, but they won't necessarily dry out your beer in the same way.
Yeah, and that has to do with how these different yeast strains actually express the gene. So there's going to be both internal and external factors on when this gene actually gets expressed, which means that for kind of a simplified explanation, it basically means that you have an input that tells the yeast cell, hey, I need to make glucoamylase. It expresses the gene. It makes that glucoamylase, shoots it out into the environment.
The yeast yells, give me food.
Yes, exactly. And it says, give me food. And certain yeast strains will do this a lot more than others. I think the classic example of this is your French Saison strain. That actually produces quite a bit of this, and ultimately will dry beers out very, very, very low gravity, final gravities, down in like, I've seen them down in like 10.003 before.
Yeah, I mean, kind of depending on your mash temperatures and your presets, but with other yeast strains, that's just not possible because there are higher starches. One of the most common ones that is either eatable or not eatable is Maltotrioses. This actually can be digestible by some yeasts regardless of being STA1 positive, but Maltotriose is something that can be broken down by the STA1 gene. So weaker yeasts, weaker eaters, they can actually still potentially eat Maltotriose if
Well, ultimately,
If
it's
they feel like
the
it.
glucoamylase will attack.
Reverend KY, thank you. Beer on me. What's your opinion on enzymes? Add like Ultraflow Max. We've talked about enzymes quite a bit before. Something like Ultraflow Max are things that are beta glucanase enzymes. We love because they really increase mash efficiency and kind of take out a lot of guesswork. But at the same time, they're easy to overdo, and enzymes that are overdone in your mash can actually leave an off flavor in your beer.
Yeah, so you got to balance that really, really carefully when you're using them. A little bit goes a long ways there.
Yeah.
So back to that Maltotriose too, which is a really fun thing that I want to make sure that we hit on, and that's that the glucoamylase will actually break that down much more easily than other really, really long chain starches, which is partly why you see that immediate drying effect in these STA positive yeast strains that you won't see in yeast strains that don't have the gene. And this is really interesting because what is it? Saccharomyces pastorianus, which is your traditional lager strains. Yeah. For those of you in the know-how, will say, now wait a minute, those can also break down Maltotriose too, right? But ultimately, these work differently, and we do have an article that we're going to link in the description down below. I think it's actually already there.
Yeah, it is.
But lager strains actually have to take that Maltotriose into the cell, and then they can actually produce the amylase within the cell in order to break that down, where these STA positive yeast strains will actually be able to put that out into the environment to break it down before it enters the cell. So they do this in a different way, and I think as a result that allows them to do it more efficiently and actually faster as well.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to see all these different ways that essentially this enzyme can be broken down. And the one thing that I could not find on it was just how rapidly all of this occurs. And because if you do have, say you do have amylase, right, out in a beer wort, ultimately that should, in theory, break down all the sugars into starches, right? And you end up with a zero gravity wort. But the reality is that doesn't really happen, and that has to do a lot with the concentration of these enzymes and the fact that those enzymes are actually slowly denaturing and kind of breaking down over time.
Yeah, I was going to say acid denaturation is a thing, and especially with this enzyme. So that's one of the reasons that, and also the yeast can feel this and don't even produce glucoamylase in certain pHs.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where, for those of you that at least were in the kind of the same boat as me, of oh yeah, that beer's just going to keep fermenting really slowly over time and build up that CO2 until it basically hits zero. That may not actually be a thing, because eventually these enzymes are gonna lose their effect. The yeast ultimately, if we're talking 6 months to a year, will actually die as well.
Yeah.
It'll stop producing those, and you're gonna end up with a stable beer. And I think the big,
unless you use Brett.
Yeah, unless you use Brettanomyces.
Brett never dies.
Brett never dies. Apparently lacto doesn't ever die too, given the right environment.
Yeah.
But
it's just a robust beastie, big old guy just hanging out inside.
But yeah, so and I think the big thing is just whether you have it in a beer and it's supposed to be there. You're using a yeast that is Diastaticus positive. It's easy to work with. It's not going to give you bottle bombs. If that yeast strain happens to get into a beer that you weren't intending to brew with, say you're brewing an American IPA, right? And for some reason that yeast strain gets in there, that's when you're going to run into issues, because now that yeast been given sugars that are accessible to it that otherwise the Chico strain couldn't access.
The flip side of that is it might actually help buffer against hop creep.
It could, yeah. I mean, it's probably too late by then, because you probably have it in a keg, but
yeah, kind of depends.
So yeah, and it can, most of these strains do produce some kind of phenol flavors and some of that clove flavor.
There's a wide variation. I was going to say that's something to probably touch on but do all these yeast strains have a dominant flavor that they all produce because of the STA1 gene, or because of specifically the glucoamylase that's put out into the world? The answer is yes and no. There are some yeasts that actually have very consistently what I call a meaty flavor, or a flavor that can be perceived as a little bit meaty, and those are typically yeasts that overexpress this, and that has to do with what sugars they're given, if they're put into a pressured environment, things like that. But for the most part, these yeasts can actually vary pretty wildly in terms of their overall flavor, even depending on temperature. So temperature will obviously affect how quickly they're producing glucoamylase, but temperature will also affect things like if they're producing extra phenols or esters alongside the fermentation. So you can get something like a Saison strain to ferment, bright and lemony or super phenoly, but you can also get certain Belgian strains that are STA1 positive that can ferment pretty clean. So if you're fermenting a neutral IPA that you want to be slightly drier, some of these will work as well.
Did we just jump into topic number 2?
We might have.
We just did the seamless transition here. So just
seamless until we talked. Check out this seamless transition we're doing.
Ultimately, let's just kind of finish out the STA stuff with how we're finding it these days, and like Peter kind of mentioned before, it's PCR, polymerase chain reaction, and that's just doing a test that searches for the specific gene and then replicates that gene a whole bunch of times.
Grows a bunch of genes so that we can figure out what they are.
Yeah. So and then we do a test to say, hey, look, that gene does exist in here. And so that's it in a nutshell. Sorry if we overwhelmed any of you out there, but hopefully we actually clarified some questions that I know that I had kind of going into this topic. And hopefully clarified some things for you all out there as well.
Or hopefully we confused you enough to just, want to brew more beer.
Yeah.
I'm like, I got to figure this out.
I guess the big takeaway, Diastaticus strains are positive, but
they're ST1 positive.
Yeah, they're fine. Brew with them, enjoy them. Clean your equipment like you should be doing thoroughly between each batch.
Or just only brew with them.
Or just only brew
just
with them. Just
get used to it.
It'd be really interesting if they hybridize a quake strain.
Oh, I'm sure they probably already have on accident.
Because then an STA1 positive, quake strain would be insane.
Dirk Dougler says, everyone make sure you hit the like button to prevent your next batch getting infected by Acetobacter. I have to agree, hitting the like button actually is a really good way to ensure that you don't get infections.
Yes, that is true.
It's a 100% effective way to sterilize your wort.
All right. So like Peter already mentioned, let's go into our second topic, which is really how temperature affects farmhouse yeast strains, because I think a lot of people don't realize that they have such a huge range. Some of them even down into the lower 60s, all the way up to 90 plus degrees are their fermentation ranges.
Yeah. So this one comes from after last week, or after this week when we released our Saison 3 ways. One of the things that I kind of closed out that video was saying I gave an order of which one I liked the best, middle, and the least. But I said at the very end that if all these were fermented 10 degrees warmer, then I would probably completely flip my results. And that has to do with how these different yeasts express themselves at different temperatures.
So yes, temperature has a huge effect, especially on the ester production. And that has a lot to do with the growth rate as well as if you're using mixed cultures, I guess. I'm kind of reading this as we go here, so forgive me. We already covered that. Which one? Do you want me to go into a specific strain now?
No, we can start on it. So farmhouse strains, but you already kind of touched on this, but farmhouse strains actually typically have a very high temperature range. On average, some of them can go down to the lower 60s, but most farmhouse strains actually they ferment like being fermented on the warm side. So a lot of them can go up to even 100 degrees. Even if the label says room temperature to 85, a lot of them can go higher than that, especially if they're secondary or third pitches. So if you want to go into one of the strains, you can.
All right. So let's start with the Havaru strain from Omega.
From Omega.
Not going to make that mistake again. So many yeast manufacturers now, and a lot of them are very good. Havaru strain, distinctly, it's actually a little bit funky. I guess it's not too far from its cousins.
Yep.
It's definitely got a little bit of a barnyard funk, and those colder temperature ranges, 65, 70 degrees. But if you ferment that warmer, it supposedly can produce some real nice bubblegum notes, right?
Yeah, so bubblegums, and bubblegum a lot of times is associated with certain phenols, so that can come along with some black pepper notes as well. But that specific yeast, I don't know if it's Hovaru or Jovaru. I called it Jovaru the entire video.
Jovaru. Oh yeah.
Jove. Yeah.
I like going Hovaru.
What's Todd? Todd was calling it Jove the entire time, and I thought that was kind of funny. I hope it's like
the Jove.
Hovaru or something like that, and then like the entire time Omega's watching us do that video, they're like, why is he calling it Jove? Or maybe they'll pick it up and they'll just call it Jove from now on too.
Yeah.
But anyways, that specific yeast fermented, it produced a nice barnyard or kind of that traditional farmhouse flavor, even fermented at room temperature because we fermented all those at 72. But as is common with farmhouse strains or pretty much any strain, ester and phenol production will increase with increased temperature. So with that one specifically, I expected a nice subtle funkiness that it already had to turn into a more dynamic and typical barnyard flavor, which would make it less sessionable because the beer that we got off that was fantastic and very, very sessionable with enough interestingness from that farmhouse funk. But if we fermented it warmer to kind of express that even more, I imagine it would go into more nuance, like, you know, you sip it out of a wine glass and you take a sip every, 30 seconds instead of drink the whole thing in a shotgun.
Yeah, and I think there is two things that go hand in hand with this warmer fermentation, and part of the reason why you're getting those flavors is because you're actually stressing the yeast out, and this sounds counterintuitive, but really that's where those flavors are coming from, and this is also why, at least for me, when I have had commercial examples in the U.S. of different Saisons and farmhouse strains, a lot of them when they are young can kind of blow you away.
Yeah.
And they get almost a little bit too aggressive, a little too phenolic for my palate, when the kind of unfortunate reality is that if those beers were to bottle condition, say, for 3 or 4 months down the road, which unfortunately on a commercial setting they're never going to get the chance to do, those beers actually calm down. All of those flavors just blend together so nicely, and they turn into a completely different beer.
Which makes it fun.
Yeah, and it makes it fun, and I mean, I think that's really what that is the epitome of farmhouse beers in general to me.
Yeah.
Is they were brewed in the, what are they traditionally brewed in the summer to be drank in the winter, right?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. So a little bit of an aside on Jovaru, which is a Lithuanian farmhouse yeast. A lot of people kind of confuse that, especially with the high temperature range of it being a Quake strain. It is Quake adjacent in that whole subset of Russian and Quake yeasts and Lithuanian farmhouse yeasts. All those farmhouse yeasts they call landrace yeasts. So if you want to know how to categorize it, and you don't want to call it Quake because it's not, then it's a landrace yeast.
Not Quake.
Sorry,
yeah. I can help that one.
Is it Quake? Well, not Quake.
God, we're funny.
Let's talk about Coast to Coast. Coast to Coast is a mixed culture with Brett and Saison strain. So the Brett I actually believe is Brett Brooks because it says it's from a Northwest brewery, and their Brett strain that they have at Omega Labs is from a Northwest brewery is Brett Brooks. And so I'm pretty sure that it is Brett Brooks, but that was the one that we said was our least favorite when we tried them all. And part of that was because it tried to be earthy and a little bit mushroomy. It tried to be funky, but the flavor was flat, so it smelled funky, but it tasted pretty neutral. And so
yeah, that's weird.
That's why I said that if we fermented that one 10 degrees warmer, that one probably would have been my favorite.
Yeah, so yeah, because you gotta have you don't want that disconnect between the aroma and the flavor. I've had that on beers happen before, and it just throws you off. And it just kills the mood, honestly. It's like, for lack of better terms, it kills the mood because
it really does.
Because you don't get what you're expecting. I mean,
yeah, you go into it, and your nose is in there, and you're like, oh, I want that funkiness. I wonder what all that's going to express like in flavor. And then it's like, oh, I could pound this whole beer in a single sip.
Place sexual innuendo here.
Do it.
All right.
So yeah, specifically with Brett, Brett's kind of a funny monster. If you ferment on the cold side, especially in a mixed culture, Brett usually takes a back note. Someone also had a question up a little bit higher saying, can you pressure ferment Brett to suppress it? The answer is not really. You can never stop the Brett if you give it enough time. But fermenting warmer can actually express Brett a little bit faster and blend in some of the Saison notes that you'll get from a warmer fermentation too. So things like black pepper and clove that you'll get from the Saison strain will actually help amplify some of the funkier Brett flavors you'll get, like alfalfa, like barnyard, horse blanket, some people say. Some of those kind of sweaty goat, that's probably my favorite. Sweaty goat flavors.
Yeah.
But you'll get those will get amplified by
I've
extra.
licked a sweaty goat.
I know, right? Since last summer. But so a lot of those phenols will actually be amplified, will actually serve to amplify some of those barnyardy, really funky flavors that you can get off Brett.
I was about to say a sweaty beaver on the other hand, and then I just decided to stop.
But you said it anyway. It's been a day since I've licked a sweaty beaver.
Yeah, nope, I'm just going to leave it there. Jesus, now I've completely lost my train of thought.
Comment your favorite sweaty beaver experience in the description box or something. I don't know. Saison's Monster. Saison's Monster is a fun yeast that we also tried, and that kind of fell into the middle range. It is actually a hybrid strain between Belgian and French Saison, and at room temperature, it gave us some fruit, some ripened fruit or maybe fruit leathery notes, as well as the notes of apple and pear, which leans a relatively neutral profile into a sweet realm, even though it finished relatively dry. So that's one of the ones that I would say fermenting warmer would make it better for reasons that Logan's going to help talk about.
What? Oh. I don't know. I haven't tasted it, so.
Save a tree, eat a beaver.
Yes.
Now we're getting into it.
I don't know. Just generally just to brighten up the whole beer profile, it seems like.
Yeah, so this is another one that'll
taking
produce.
a stab at it.
It'll produce some more bubblegum notes. It'll increase temperature. Will accentuate those phenols. It'll give you some bubblegum, some clove, some black pepper notes, and some things that'll take away from that fruity kind of feel that you can get fermenting it on the lower end. So yeah, same kind of thing. Basically, temperature, especially with Farmhouse Strains, serves to amplify. Hey, somebody gave us Canadian $5.
Thanks, Kent.
Appreciate you. But serves to higher temperatures serve to amplify those phenols, and those phenols can really serve to round out beer in the brighter sense of the word, rather than the lower temperature can sometimes accentuate malts, which is it's exactly different than English yeasts.
So there you go. So yeah, kind of a quick recap of the tasting video that is available on the 3 different Saison yeast strains from Omega.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think should we just open it up to questions at this point? We have a couple other topics, but we didn't really, I feel like those can be saved for another day.
Yeah. Let's, if you guys got any
systems.
questions.
I feel like we can talk about that next. No, maybe in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks we can talk about instant beer systems.
Sure. Whenever people want them. That beaver's sweaty. He's been working.
Innuendo off. We will do an innuendo off if we get 100 likes.
Yes. It's going to be terrible. Yeah, someone says if we get 100 likes, can we have an innuendo off between Logan and Peter instead of a rap battle?
So,
sure.
Yeah. So everybody go ahead and throw your questions in the comments right now, and we will start going through and answering those for you.
Yeah.
I do know I saw one question earlier on the chat talking about, I think they were talking about our seltzers again. And they were asking what yeast strain we use, and I think we've settled on, speaking of Saisons, on a Saison yeast, right?
Yeah, so we actually use the French Saison yeast for our hard seltzer. I think that combined with a good amount of nutrients produces a neutral enough profile that really still screams, I'm a seltzer, but it gives you a little bit of a funkiness, which is, I think, a bridge to a lot of the other flavors. And so instead of being like, I'm sparkling water with this one random acidic essential oil in it, it's really kind of bridging that gap and creating like, I am a cohesive drink. Yeah. That's kind of what we ended up settling on. Yeah,
it sounds like they used distiller's yeast, which so many people use.
So many people use distiller's yeast.
I don't know why that became a thing, honestly.
Was that the DADY?
I don't think they said what kind of distiller's yeast it was. But yeah, distiller's yeast I wouldn't recommend.
In general. There is one that BSG wants to send me that's a super, super neutral distiller's yeast. So I might give it a try, but at the same time, I really want that specific bridge of almost funkiness to be there, because it does help bridge the gap between the flavors that we're adding, like the recent one is raspberry ginger, and the base neutral profile.
Hey, thank you, Small Batch Brewing Co. Another super chat.
Awesome, appreciate you.
But
always makes us feel good.
yeah, it does. Hey, they give us 5 pounds. I think those are still worth more than the US dollar. So.
Garage Brewing says, are you guys going to finally try my raspberry sour today?
It's still in the fridge, isn't it?
We might have to, yeah, it is. We might have to wait until, let's wait until we've got another guest on. Let's wait until we got maybe Mark next week.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, we have Mark from Bardic Brewing coming in next week, who also is in our the Willet beer. So
yeah, that'll come full circle. Then we should schedule Randy for the next one.
Might as well.
That way we can get all the Willet beer alumni.
We only got 65 likes, otherwise Randy,
Anvil Foundry recirculating during mash. What's the best way to get the wort out of the tubing pre-boil without spilling it everywhere? Once you shut the valve off, the pump can no longer push the wort through. That's a good question. We don't usually worry about it, honestly.
Without the wort. What do you mean spilling everywhere?
So I guess pinch the tip, and then give it a little hand up.
For what?
The recirculation kit on the Anvil Foundry. So there's wort still in the tubing, basically, and they want to get that back into the boil. It's nominal, so we don't really worry about it. It's not enough to...
Oh, they're trying to get that back into the boil?
Yeah.
Oh, don't worry about that. That's like 3 ounces.
Yeah. But if you want, I would say pinch the tip and then roll it down.
Yeah, don't worry about trying to get all that back into the boil. You're gonna be chasing efficiency for the rest of your life.
Peter's hard and cider.
And yeah, don't worry about little things like that. In fact, I prefer personally to overshoot my batch sizes, and actually, which means that sometimes
an extra pound of grain.
Yeah, sometimes it might mean that I'm leaving like 3 pints in my fermenter, but to me that's totally worth it to get like really, really solid, clean, quality beer into whatever I'm serving, whether it be a bottle or a keg.
Yeah, go for flavor.
Yeah, go for flavor. Don't worry about your efficiencies.
I mean, worry about your efficiencies, but for different reasons.
Yeah.
Have you guys heard of the new yeast strains by Omega, Bonanza, and a strawberry one apparently sans phenols? You guys going to give them a try? Haven't heard of them. I think I just saw them pop up on an email that I got, but we will definitely get those in.
Yeah.
We love Omega, and Omega sent us a lot of T-shirts, and so we've got to use them more.
We do. Yeah. I don't know what happened to my T-shirts. I got my Quake shirt on.
Nice.
I'll take my clothes off for people.
Take your clothes off.
If you get to 69 likes, I will take part of my clothes off for everyone.
I'll cut off a sleeve.
That is 4, by the way. If you guys
people are
can't
talking
do
about
math.
DADY yeast. That's just it's just distiller's yeast. It's not very good. A9 pub diacetyl rest. Yes, you want a diacetyl rest with pub, but also just because it's sleepy. So pub is one that if you ferment low, you probably want to give it a little VDK rest at the end, just for the fact that it's going to help finish fermenting the beer.
Yeah, just make sure during the end of fermentation that it's 68 to 70 degrees for a couple days, and you will be golden.
Brewing my first NEPA, but money is tight. Looking for cheaper hops. That's the bane of everyone's existence. Get Columbus. Columbus is a relatively cheap hop. It tastes amazing. People don't use it enough.
Yeah, stick with the classic names that aren't trademarked. You'll be able to get those for a lot cheaper, and it's literally just because they're not trademarked. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're any worse hop. It just means that more people are growing them, so you've got more supplies for you. So
NEPA is a surprisingly versatile beer. It's more about how you brew it than what ingredients you use, which a lot of people kind of get caught up on. Yep. They're like, oh, I've got to use my Galaxies and my Citras and my Simcoes or whatever, or all the whatever the new hops that people are coming out with.
Yeah.
If you brew it correctly, the same base flavor profile will be there regardless of what hop you use, and then you're just kind of picking out nuances from the different hops. And so hop with relatively high oils like Columbus, which isn't going to be like Galaxy levels, but it's still got high oils. It's got the right oils. It's got good myrcene. It's going to work as long as you're not throwing it all in at 60,
Yeah, I mean, you could even do a single hop Cascade if you're trying to be on the cheap side. I know Cascade is always reasonably priced, at least in bulk, and so yeah, and it would be just as good of a hop as any.
Is Special X a crystal malt? No, it's not. Special X is it's crystal adjacent. Basically, it's they use moisture during the kilning process in some way that's proprietary and secret. They use moisture in some way to get intense color, but for the most part, it's kilned like a toasted malt, not a crystal malt.
Yeah, it's the good parts of crystal with the dryness of a biscuit malt, with the richness of an otherwise Maillard malt. That's about as good as I can describe it right there.
Someone says, thanks for the advice on riding it out a few weeks back with my fruited beer. It turned out amazing. Awesome. That's good to
Yeah,
hear.
would like to hear that. Can I sniff into the mic just to piss off Ryan? I actually did it once already. CTZ for the win.
Do you recommend buying a second refrigerator for a fermentation chamber? Depends on how much space you have and how much you want to put into it to not be, only okay. I like to, if you can, I'd like to say go with glycol in any way or do some sort of a glycol chiller. Yeah, I was talking to somebody yesterday that actually built his own glycol chiller with a used air conditioner and a cooler. Both of which he was given. So there's ways to do it that are a lot smaller and easier to control single beers. The hard thing with fermentation chambers is a lot of times you have beers that need to be at different temperatures at different times. And so, lifting a fermenter out of a chest freezer or something like that all the time isn't necessarily the easiest way to go.
Yeah. I mean, if you got the room and you've got a spare fridge, I would say go for it, but that's my opinion. Just because, why wouldn't you? All you gotta do is slap a temp controller on it, and you're golden. And it's better than nothing, I guess, is my biggest thing. Yes, glycol. Yeah. Glycol is always ideal, but again, glycol can be kind of out of the options for a lot of people that are on a small budget. To where I think a lot of times having, getting your buddy's old refrigerator and throwing it down your basement and slapping a $50 temp controller on there. I mean, yeah, it works. Yeah. So.
Someone says they've tried Bella Saison a couple of times and never got drinkable beer out of it. Absolutely scrubs all the hop aroma and tastes the same way. Bella Saison, you got to ferment it warm. And if you want hop aroma, then I would say just dry hop it after your beer's crashed.
Yep. Yeah, like we talked about. Was that just last week, actually, we were talking about that? About how...
I forget. Time just blends together for me.
Yeah, it's but yeah, Bella Saison dry hopped Living Daylights out of it. Right day 6, I'm gonna say randomly. Even though obviously that varies depending on your fermentation, but dry hop it.
Is Genus opening at 10 today? Yes. Is it only to go? Sort of. You can drink outside or you can have to go beer.
It is a nice day, so you are welcome to drink outside. We will throw the fire tables out.
Yeah.
They will be available. Thank you for the super chat, Aaron. Golly, how'd we miss that? He said 11 channels, excited to brew West Coast IPA. Awesome. Glad you got one of those. Wait, is Aaron the guy that we forgot to send the thing to?
Maybe.
Aaron, we apologize if we did not send you that West Coast IPA right away.
Gonzalez or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, if that's you, by the way, let us know your shirt size. We'll send you a shirt with the recipe kit. We have it all ready to go. It's just that we completely slipped up on it.
All right. Do's and don'ts video for seltzers. Yeah, I think we can do that pretty soon. I do think that that we're getting there. What's the most traditional version of a Saison? That's actually a great question there.
Blended yeast.
Yeah, my take on blended yeast and all Pilsner malt too. I would say. So most traditional version.
It's a super broad category, but the original Saison's kind of like it stemmed from a farmhouse or wild ale style, which probably had a mix of Brett and Saison yeast in it, fermented just kind of wildly. So I don't know if it's actually a traditional specific style that you can pick out, but if you wanted to do the oldest version of the style, it would probably be a mixed ferm with French Saison and Brettanomyces, maybe Brett Brux.
Yeah.
Fermented at 100.
Yeah, so fermented hot, and then, like I mentioned earlier, bottle conditioned for at least a few months, just for it to all meld into its lovely little concoction. I wonder... Nah, that'd be terrible in a cask, actually. I mean, if you really want to go to the OG, it would have been in a cask, but because they probably wouldn't have been bottling back then.
Why is my 95% Pilsner, 5% wheat beer with Safel 04 not cleaning up? It's just so hazy. This is the 5th batch. you might be doing it wrong. There's some things you can do during fermentation and during mash to make sure it clears up. So during mash, I would step mash that even with a little bit of wheat. But also a really rigorous boil and a quick crash can help that clear up. During fermentation, you can always add enzymes or clarity firm or actual clarifiers.
Yeah, sounds to me like you just got a bunch of proteins in there. So I mean, I would just taste it. Wheat beers are often hazy. So if you got a lot of proteins in there, they're going to give you some haze. If you want to clean those up, then yeah, there's ways to clarify. Like we've mentioned on here before, Super Clear is kind of always our go-to. It's a 2-part clarifier. Works fantastically.
Do you have a quike strain you would recommend to emulate the British ale ester profile? The Herd Omega's SB may work. I'm going to try it soon. Not really is the answer, but honestly, the closest would probably be maybe Lutra, even though that's super neutral, but it can be slightly malt leaning.
Diamond Roads. Brewed a porter and used Lutra, pitched at 90 degrees Fahrenheit, used a heat pad on my stainless fermenter, and it got super vigorous and heated up to 103. Would that be too high and kill off any yeast? You're pushing it at 103. It's definitely.
Which yeast is it?
Lutra. Yeah.
Lutra. No, Lutra should be able to survive up to 115. Probably.
It'll probably what really will probably happen is I doubt you're not going to start like just killing your yeast, but what'll happen is the yeast will start actually slowing down its fermentation, just because that is starting to push the edge of its field. I know when we've done quikes here, they've gotten up to, I think 110 actually is where they actually start self-regulating.
Yeah, well, I think so. Most quike strains their thermal death is at like almost 120 degrees.
Yeah.
So if we're actually killing, I don't think you'd kill.
Yeah,
but you might just get a different fermentation profile. I honestly wouldn't worry too much about it.
Yeah.
Would a champagne yeast be better in hard seltzer? No.
Yeah. Stay away from champagne yeast. And it's mostly just because, so your champagne yeast, and I think this can be lumped into the distilling yeast as well, is it's just a lot harder to get those yeast to flocculate and drop out and like ultimately clean them up out of the seltzer. And
they've got a distinct like white winey note, like
they do.
It's just a distracting flavor. It's a flavor that
champagne
doesn't blend
yeast
in.
does.
Champagne yeast, does. Yeah.
The distilling yeast will be a little different.
Have you ever used an EBIAB for sous vide steak? I used claw hammers and it turned out amazing. I've thought about that a lot, but I haven't yet.
Yeah.
Can we talk about fermentation temperatures and the effects on dry hopping, especially when using quike? Yes, if you're using quike and doing dry hopping, it's honestly best to do something like a pressure fermentation to avoid volatilization of essential oils, especially because they ferment so fast. So it's not just the actual fermentation temperature volatilizing, it's also the turbulence from the yeast being very, very active at those warmer temperatures that's going to help scrub out a lot of stuff. And so if you pressure ferment, you can keep a lot of those aromatics in. And yeah, that's so cold temperatures are better usually.
I would say if you don't have a way to pressure ferment, maybe just not ferment the quite as hot so that you can slow it down, because we're talking like 2 and 3 day fermentations here, which means that you're having to like check the gravity every 4 hours on the hot side. And basically you want to get down to, I would say for a dry hop, about like, I don't know, like what, 70% attenuation, somewhere in there. So you really want to find that sweet spot, which literally means it might change from 4 hours to the next, if you're talking about, 48-hour fermentation. So
someone says 2 more likes and Logan goes full Magic Mike.
We're there.
We're there. How long should we do a diacetyl rest?
Speaking of quike,
72 hours. Doesn't really matter.
Why? Every time.
3 hours?
Just above the nipples.
Oh, there we go. Logan's nipples. Everyone rate Logan's nipples on a scale of 1 to 10.
No. What? Why? All right. A few more questions, and we will finish up this live stream. Well, thank you for all the likes, everyone. Hey, I see there's still 130 watching, so and we only got 70 likes.
Pilsner Malt Stout, yes. That's an experiment we need to do.
Pilsner Malt always stout.
So if you don't have easy access to Special X, what would be the next best thing? Care Aroma.
Thanks, Lisa.
What'd she give you?
Apparently your wife was the 69th like.
Nice. Bottle conditioning of Vienna lager right now. Should I follow the same protocol as I should with conditioning ales? Sort of, but you want a longer conditioning time, especially with bottle conditioned Vienna lagers. You don't want any of that sugar to be things.
Hey, somebody gave me an 8, so that's cool.
That's good.
So we got a really good question about when to add clarifiers, and specifically in conical fermenters. Clarifiers in at least
Ricardo, super chat. Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, Ricardo. But yeah, clarifiers in conical fermenters. I'm just gonna kind of jump to the commercial side of things too. Typically, these will be added on the cold side. And we still use basically that same type of super clear chitosan and Kisasol is what we'll do. And we actually add them in a lot of times in the bright tank, and this is going to depend on your system. But cold crash your beer for a day. Add in, which one's the first one? I forget which one's the first one now.
Which one? Oh, chitosan.
Chitosan?
No, sorry, Kisosol. Kisosol's first,
Okay.
which is like biofine.
Okay,
it's positively charged, then chitosan.
At least I'm not the only one. Yeah, so Kisasol, add in Kisasol, let it sit for usually 1 to 2 days is all you really need for that. And then you add in the chitosan to finish it off, and about another couple days. And at that point, it should drop out any of the haze, and then also kind of cake it onto the bottom, which means that you are good to rack into your bright tank or your final serving container. That's what I meant. Perfect.
I use gelatin often to clarify my beer. I've got a West Coast IPA that I want to use it on. Would it kill the hoppiness, aroma, and taste? See, gelatin is negatively charged, so possibly. So there's a couple different things going on there. The short answer is probably at least a little bit, but if you did it in a pressurized system and you did it right, there's ways to keep the hop oils in there. The biggest thing is you don't want to be scrubbing out any oils by, turbulating. I often CO2 bubble my beers when I'm fining, so.
Yeah. The clarifying agents that we use are liquid, but sometimes you can also have them in a powder form. Biofine and gelatin, you would add very much the same way. Both of those are going to work best when the beer is cold.
Kisosol and chitosan are liquids.
I just answered that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Biofine is the same thing as Kisosol.
Yeah. As for, I'm trying to think of other things. You've got the...
What beer style would you recommend for a braggot?
Is it... Wait, what? Oh, the base beer. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm like, braggot is a beer style. I'm so confused.
I'd say a red ale with mostly Red X.
Pilsner malt. I'm just on a Pilsner malt kick today.
Pure Pilsner malt.
Pure Pilsner
We also
malt,
have things like Sparkloid, which Sparkloid usually is pretty good at not stripping out flavors.
Yeah.
Gelatin often strips out some flavors, but it's one of those things that I don't know if a lot of people would tell the difference. Two-stage findings definitely.
To me, they strip out the unwanted flavors.
See, that's kind of the give and take. Is sometimes they can strip out some of that like vegetal like greenness too.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean they all strip out some degree of flavors, but a lot
any
of times
non-animal derived finding agent, both Sparkloid and Biofine / Kisosol are vegan, I believe.
Yeah. So yeah.
Day 6 of a Belgian double ferment. Can I add more yeast energizer at this stage? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's not gonna hurt anything.
Oh, Sparkloid's discontinued. I forgot about that. Get all the Sparkloid. Buy it up.
Why don't they love us anymore? All right. Well, I think that is all of our questions. You know what? I think this is a good time to finish up our live stream. I want to thank everyone for tuning in today.
Thank you for those who gave us super chats. We always appreciate that. We feel loved and supported. Andrew, if you are there today, I'll send you a message. We have your kit built up. We just haven't shipped it out yet. Usually we try to ship it out within a couple days. No.
Yeah, sorry about that, Andrew.
Well, I was kind of soloing for the last 3 days, and so I couldn't. Aaron Gonzalez.
I was like,
yeah.
I don't think his name was Andrew.
Yeah, but send us your shirt size, or I'll send you a private message to get your shirt size, and we'll send you a shirt with that. It's been a hectic little bit of time, but thank you so much for. He says, "No worries, fellas. Thanks." Did he send his shirt size? We'll figure it out. Anyways, thank you for tuning in. Logan's going to do the closeout and tell you to subscribe.
Yes, like Peter says, please subscribe and like our channel. If you want to support us, head on over to our website and check out our swag, as well as a handful of recipe kits that we have up there that have been handcrafted by the team here at Genus. And watch the kimchi video over on the Steel Barrels website. Otherwise, we will see you again next week with Mark Haney from Bardic Brewing, talking about, I believe, some English-style beers and methods on brewing high-gravity beers as well, which we sort of have a underwritten competition going on between the two breweries at the moment. So we'll see you next week at 8:45 a.m. Pacific Standard Time.
And the stream
Ended.